Welcome back to the Transforming Basketball podcast. Today we're joined by Marti Canellas. Marti runs one of my favorite podcasts out there, and it's a new podcast, so I definitely recommend checking it out, the Fosbury Flop. And Marti just has a fascinating background himself, and then when he combines that with some of the guests he's been having on, it's no wonder why it's such a good podcast for anyone interested in skill acquisition. So, Marti, it's a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you very much, Alex. The pleasure is mine.
Oh, much appreciated, man. So I think you have a fascinating background, and we were just talking about it offline beforehand. Could you just explain for the listeners kind of your background, especially delving into some of the research, and also, how you're applying this in some other sports? And then we'll get back to the basketball piece in a few moments.
Yes, that's a interesting and difficult question at the same time. But I would say that I just started my sports path as a basketball player, and I don't know what exactly, but I think curiosity led me to become basketball coach. So I started being basketball coach, and there I would say that I faced a very big enemy on my path, which it was the uncertainty of the game and also my personal insecurity. So there I felt a big need to kind of capture basketball, let's say, to decipher every game situation, every technical gesture, no?
Yeah.
And I felt like that improved me constantly as coach because constantly I was finding causes, consequences, what causes what. And at the same time that I was curious, I was insecure, and I wanted to be better, I was very lucky to have amazing mentors, I would say. First of all, I would say I met Joan, no? That Joan Cortés from the Catalan Basketball Federation. I would say he was the first one who I was wearing a reductionist glasses, looking at the game from a reductionist point of view. And he started mentioning, well, I started changing my glasses towards a more holistic ones. Let's say a glasses that watch more at the game and less at many myths, beliefs we coaches have. And I would say Joan was the first one who started talking about, let's say, complexity, game-based approaches, ecological dynamics, without mentioning any terms of it.
Yeah.
So at the moment in the path, I was trying to capture basketball, know why things happen, what to do in each situation, how to shoot, how to make layups. I was very lucky to find mentors, as I said, that Joan, that break many myths I was having in my backpack. Then, to sum up, I could talk about many more, but I would say some mentors like Joan changed how I looked at basketball, looking more at the game, forgetting about techniques, other myths, about isolation of capacities. And then I met Natalia Balaguer,
Yes, I
which
know
is one of
Natalia.
the pioneers of complex systems approach. But she changed my way of looking not to basketball, but to whole training and to life, I would say, no? Understanding a bit for complex systems approach is one of the best things related to sport that has happened, no? Understand really why things happen, what happens, why happens everything, or when you do one thing, what are the real effects, the real consequences, what can you expect of each intervention. So I would say with Natalia, I did my bachelor degree of sports science thesis with her,
Mm.
and yeah, there it was amazing. I met, like, through the books, Rob Gray, Ian Renshaw, many other researchers, and that was I can describe that process, no? Because it's when, okay, you start understanding the principles, and at that point, all the lessons I had from basketball, I was applying it to paddle, another completely new immersion sport that was growing up a lot. And I was in Finland. I arrived to Finland to do an internship and help the Jyväskylä Basketball Academy, the academy of my city. And then I started uh, working in paddle.
Got it. Got it. And When you were in Finland, Marty, were you doing some work in the academy helping them understand an ecological approach and implement some of that?
Not really. I was familiar with all of those, not methodology, with
Sure.
all the way of doing, no, but not really. I saw in Finland, that was the first moment in which I saw how much culture impacts how we play, how we train. So that was a very hard time for me. Alex,
Sure.
one moment. Do you want me to repeat?
No, no, no. This is great. This is great.
Okay. The so sorry, I come back again.
Don't worry, don't worry. Well, we got an editor too, Marty, so this is great. It's
Okay.
easy.
Be-
I
because
this
did you hear the sound?
I didn't know.
Oh, okay, because downstairs there was a big sound.
I didn't hear it.
Okay, so I'm sorry about it.
No, don't worry, mate. Don't worry.
I,
This is great.
I started.
Cool, cool, cool.
Once I was in Finland, I would say, in touch, knowing these ecological, more complex approaches. Uh, I would describe it as reasonable. I don't know. Maybe I'm a bit too, but well, and there I saw really how culture of a place, of a society, of a country impacts the game, no?
Yeah.
And I arrived to Finland expecting that it would be a Catalonia way of training, way of playing, much colder, but no, it was completely different. I saw the really impact of a tight culture, no,
Mm,
in the way they coach, in the way they play, in the way they understand training, physical training, technical training, tactical training. So it was very hard for me because at that point I can say this now, but at that point my head was like, why they do 1 against 0 and then it's 5 against 5, or why all the gym movements are isolated, completely far away from the game. I came from a, this is why I say the culture, because I came from Catalonia, that, as I told you before, no, we have, for example, a big influence of Barça and its methodology, and all their, like, people like Francisco Seirulo, Julio Tous, no, that luckily they have a Barcelona methodology that, for us, they say that Barcelona is the Catalonia's army. Like, it's very representative for all Catalan people. So if Barcelona has a methodology based on the game, on small-sided games,
yeah.
very respectful with the essence of the game, you, of course, I recognize this now, but I have to admit that being a Barcelona supporter, being from the Catalan culture, impacts how do I see sport and how do I train. So going to Finland, for example, and seeing a completely different thing, you can, with hindsight bias, you can understand it. But once you were there, it was like, oh, a difficult, a difficult
It's
moment.
It's really interesting, Marty. I mean, there's so many directions I want to take this in, but I think just talking about Catalonia, I think it's very interesting because you mentioned Joan Cortez and Sergio Oliva has mentioned Joan's name to me a bunch of times as someone who's just doing an incredible job applying these ideas. And it seems like it's really interesting some of the work that's being done in the Catalonian community. But I think it would be interesting now, maybe if we look at forms of life, Marty. I think that would be really interesting, maybe to if we go deeper into everything you've just spoken about, like on the culture, the forms of life. Maybe could you just describe kind of what a form of life is for the coaches listening to us, and kind of why it's actually important for coaches? Because I think like you had obviously James Vaughan on the podcast. That was an amazing episode. But I think it would be really interesting for coaches to know why it's important that they consider the role of forms of life.
Okay, Alex, I try, but you can add and be more precise about my reply,
Sure.
okay? I would say maybe a form of life, like an invisible backpack we all carry, about intangible things, things that are not objects, but beliefs, ways of seeing the world, no? That has been brought to you by uh, where have you lived, who were your parents, with who were you interacting, what kind of village were you living, no? all these cultural invisible aspects that shape how you see the world, your reality. I don't know if you would agree or if you
I
would change
love
something.
that. Invisible backpack. That's the best way I've heard it described, Marty. That's awesome. Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's I don't know the sentence exactly, but Confucius says something like, study the past if you want to divine the future. It's like, okay, knowing where do we come from, a little bit in line with a paper that I recommend to everybody, that it's periodization theory confronting an inconvenient truth from John Keely, no? That it explains where you go in the future differs from when you come back in the past. So a little bit knowing your story, why you do things, what impacts you have had in your life, condition how you see your reality and how you are going to evolve. I tell you, for example, as I said about my culture, no, that being FC Barcelona impacted in the way of looking at training. I would say you also that the way of being Catalan, uh, being a FC Barcelona supporter, loving Pep Guardiola has also impacted me unconsciously. When you are a Barcelona supporter and you see Pep Guardiola coaching and you see him making all the movements and being so authoritarian, so on top of the process, no, because probably he's a genius and he's one of the few ones who is able to capture the sport and be on top of it. So then you start learning as coach and you see Guardiola at the same time. So you are like, okay, I want to be like them. And you grow up thinking that you have to be the boss of the team, the controller.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
have that belief, that thing in my invisible backpack. And then with the years, I was like, hey, Marti, maybe that loving Pep Guardiola has gave you a lot of happiness because I wish I could win as he fails, but then also has conditioned strongly my way of seeing coaching, that I have to be the boss, that I have all the solutions, that this goes that me is the one who knows and has to save the team, when completely is the opposite. Completely this role can be done by him.
Yeah. I love that. And I think it's funny, Marty, because in basketball we see so much copy paste where it's identical offenses, identical drills, just the lens you spoke about a reductionist lens at the start, and it's even the same reductionist lens that coaches are using. And I think when you start to look at forms of life and their role as like a very influential environmental constraint or environmental constraints, it's really interesting because you understand that you can't copy paste because every context is so different. I think it's interesting because coaches might, if they really looked at these things, they might understand why their players behave in certain ways and not trying to get them all moving and doing the exact same things, which unfortunately is something I think we see a lot.
Yeah, I completely agree. For me, I was already having some doubts, some questions in my mind about it, but the book Rule Makers, Rule Breakers from Michel Gelfand completely helped me to understand it much better. And I recommend it to all of those who have worked in different countries or have
Mhm.
different cultures, because it explains how social norms of each country emerge and how tight or soft they are. And these social norms, this invisible backpack, has impacts on the politics of the country, but how people behaves, if they are more traditional or more innovative. And at that point, you understand why the same drill that you could do in Barcelona was great, but the same drill you could do in Finland, there wasn't any creative or any of the things you were seeing in Barcelona,
Yeah. And that's
because
why.
the drill is the same, the drill is the same, but the Finnish culture, for example, is more towards order. It's more discipline. Why? Basically because they had a tight story, that it had made the society evolve towards a more organized way to face all these threats they were facing from Sweden, from Russia, from the nature, all the coldness, many threats that we didn't have in
Yeah.
Barcelona.
Yeah.
And this is just a small example, but all of these conditions. And then if we go maybe to Spain and we would compare Barcelona, the Basque Country, Madrid, you also see completely different ways of behaving just because the story. We had a civil war, just as an example, and many, many years before much things happened.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's great. So this leads actually perfectly onto kind of just differences between other areas of Spain or Spanish basketball and Catalonian basketball, because I used to live in Madrid for 2.5 years, one of the best times of my life. But I did quite a bit of coaching when I was there, Marty, and I was working with some pretty good, some of the better youth programs in Madrid, and I saw a lot of the, what is it, Tecnificación, like a lot of the 1-on-0, 2-on-0, 3-on-0, and it does strike me that I think in just from the coaches I'm kind of have been having some conversation with in Catalonia, there's a lot more playing and maybe a lot more constraints that approach. Even like you said, if coaches are just doing small sided games without really going deep into CLA, it's still play and there's something going on. And I think in Spanish basketball, there's this big culture of, we got to have the 1-on-0, get the details, the technique. Is that something that you've seen, and would you say that's fairly accurate?
For me, the first difference, I'm talking maybe 10 years ago, because it was when I was playing, about playing. The first difference I saw was about referees, that the quality was very different. I don't know how it's nowadays. And then as a coach, maybe I'm talking about 5 years ago. I agree. In some camps, on some moments that I could be in touch with people from other regions, and also looking a bit in the social media and networks, which obviously is not representative, I would say, yes, I see this maybe a big different trend between the how you see the fundamentals, or what do the kid needs in order to start training, to learn the basics, to learn technique, many 1 against 0, uh, and the other one that is not just play, build the fundamentals while playing, that the fundamentals are not like isolated stereotyped movements. And yeah, I would say so. But I think the biggest, and now I'm just comparing Barcelona or Catalonia and Madrid, the biggest difference I see is in mentality. And you can see this mentality that it has impacted in soccer, Real Madrid and FC Barcelona. But also there is a very curious story about water polo, this soccer in the water. In the Olympics of Barcelona 92, water polo was only played in Barcelona, so the team was full of Catalan people. And they say that Catalan people is very intelligent, technical, but not very proud, not very cocky. And at that point, they started playing it in Madrid, and Madrid were the opposite. They were very cocky, very proud, but not so much caring about how to do things, this beauty. So they said in Barcelona 92, it was the first time they were able to win an Olympic medal. It was a silver medal. And they were, it was because these two very different ways of being related to the culture, to the place of Spain, what was allowed them to start an amazing era for Spanish water polo. Because what once had, the other ones didn't, and the opposite. They complemented each other
Yeah,
very well.
yeah. Oh, that's
It's
interesting.
something also that you can see, sorry, in soccer. In Barcelona, we don't understand this courage of Madrid, of coming back, of scoring at the last minute while they'll play bad. But in Barcelona, if you win and the team plays bad, all the supporters kill you, kill the coach.
Mm. And that's it comes down to forms of life again. That's why they're so interesting. Yeah. So such an influential form of constraint. So I wanted to swing this a little bit, Marty, and go to complex systems. So I think we've we I don't think I've actually obviously I've spoken a lot about bits of dynamical systems on previous episodes when, speaking about ecological dynamics, but really going deeper into complex systems, I think it could be interesting for coaches. So maybe we could start just kind of a layman's definition of what complex systems approach is, and then we can just start to take it in some different directions from there.
Okay, I would maybe describe it as a criteria, not a methodology, that makes you understand the behavior of living organisms. And I would say living organisms as persons, players, teams, uh, big networks, not machines. Machine
Um,
is a complicated system, so I would exclude it.
yeah,
And that I think, sorry, it's one of the biggest problems we have, that we still in the 21st century coach complex systems as they behave like complicated systems.
yeah, that's exactly it. Where it's the drills, it's the predetermined, and it actually links. I wrote this quote from John Cortez, who you had on your podcast, and he said, if a player can tell before the exercise begins how he or she will behave, it means it is a good exercise for synchronized swimming and not for basketball.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the point you just raised, Marty, with the complicated system. Yeah, yeah.
Here I see also another form of life influence, that is the Taylorist influence, no? How all
Mm,
the society in the 19th and 20th century was organized surrounding the Taylorism, which is basically the how to organize factories, schools in a more efficient way, assuming that you can calculate everything, you can separate everything, isolate everything. And this has conditioned us so much how they teach us in schools, how they want to measure everything. And at the way this reductionist way of doing, this reductionist way of thinking, at the end you learn it just as because it's in the form of life.
yeah, that's
But
it.
yeah, sorry, I went a bit away from the
No,
complex
no, I thought that
systems.
was perfect. I think what I wanted to ask then next is how, like studying complex systems, what are the implications of that for coaches in terms of why is it that we shouldn't be teaching these very specific techniques, these high, giving internal feedback, doing all of this in a very rigid way? What's kind of the science behind complex systems that suggests that, that isn't the way to do it?
Okay, very good and difficult question. I try my best. So then, if we assume what is a complex system, no? A system composed by many components which interact among them and the environment, and its behavior, let's say the result, it's not decided by any exact agent, internal or external, but it's self-organized by its whole. Like it's not like a computer that you code and then it behaves. No, a complex system is not a complicated system that needs to be programmed. No, it can live without being programmed. Maybe, I don't know, it comes to my mind, but we would say a dog. I don't know if we fall. I have seen that in my family. Our first way of teaching our dog was direct behaviorism, conductism, order, action, instruction, like stimulus response. No, I mean this works coding, this works with computer, but this doesn't work with people, with players. Why? Because complex systems self-organize and they can adapt. They can learn uh, without us or in spite of us.
Yeah,
So assuming first this fact that the complex system interacts, has many components that we don't know, where is it going, I think helps to accept this uncertainty that I was fighting, because you
mm,
realize, okay, I'm not controlling, I'm not controlling it, I'm not behind the wheel, so I have to take more, maybe not a passive, but an active, not interventionist position
yeah,
that you can influence, maybe more in touch with an Oriental point of view. We Occidentals like a lot to intervene, to decide, maybe the Oriental of looking more in the environment, manipulating more of constraints
yeah,
in order to help the team.
yeah.
So The fact of realizing there is a complex system that can adapt, can evolve, can learn, not 100% thanks to you, also puts the responsibility on the team. Let's say, no, I understand that the team can adapt, so I don't need to have a position in which I'm on top of the team. I have to save, I have to order, I have to tell solutions because I know they can find them. It's our human nature as people, like we can do it. So if I pose a problem, an exercise based on the game, the complex systems, the team, or if it's a single sport, sorry, a player wants to win. So if I put this problem and the complex systems start self-organizing, adapting with the clear intention of winning the game, of solving that problem, I just need to help the team to do it, but I don't need to tell the solution. I don't know if I'm explaining well because
You're
they
explaining it excellently. Yeah.
they know how to do it. The problem is that when we do closed exercise of synchronized swimming, for example, I think there, if we don't respect the nature of the game, the essence, then you want your players behave according to what your opinions are or what are your beliefs. Because you start with 2 against 0, 1 against 0 exercise to see what you want, to see what you believe is good, not to do what the game says to the games. So that's why sometimes they improve, they perform in spite of us.
Yeah.
Because even though we have been training far away from the essence of the game, making them do what our minds, what the coaches Wilbing wants, in the game, it's like the game drive them in a different path.
Marty, that was really well explained. I loved it. What I want to go to is you spoke about intentions, and I think some you mentioned Renshaw at the start of the podcast, obviously one of the most influential researchers behind the constraint-led approach. And he always says that intention is the most influential form of constraint. And I really see that just the more I the more I continue to work with players and go down this path, I just think intentionality is everything. And I think talking about intentions of a complex system, looking at the team, looking at a group of individuals, what I often see, Marty, is a lot of coaches nowadays, maybe they would go to a small-sided game in practice, but I often find it's a lot of the coaching I see is lacking with intentionality. So especially in like professional settings, when players do go live in a practice, I often find that because it's not a well-constrained activity, or simply the coach hasn't been very clear talking about what intentions are in terms of, what they're looking for maybe within an offense. And I'm not being like reductionist, but just talking principles of play, a principles of play framework. And I think that's a huge problem because if we're going to, play live, I think it's so easy to make some very simple changes to elevate the intentionality, and you get a completely different result versus just rolling the balls out, playing in a small-sided game, boom, and the players go. What would you say to that?
Here, my biggest lesson with intentionality was given to me by Natalia Balaguer, and it was regarding the leadership of teams. And I remember perfectly Natalia Balaguer, she told me, at the beginning, the most important thing is intention. Why the kid is coming to training? Because her dad obligates her, so then you are going to fail. Or what are you looking with the team? To win the Champions League, but they just want to have fun? So, okay, Marti, or you convince or you adapt, but if not, what is going to emerge from that will be very bad. A Catalan psychologist named Pep Marí made a very good example of it with the English breakfast. He said, in order to make the English breakfast, you have the chicken who made just a small effort to put the egg on the breakfast, and you have the pig, the pork, who lives his life so you can eat bacon. So if in a team you mix chickens and pigs, you are completely you are not going to take anything good out of it. But then regarding to the game, I've been thinking a lot, but I don't know if it's because when I started, let's say, being in touch with intentions, I was in paddle. I don't, how would I say it? I don't keep it in mind a lot because in paddle, I would say in order to make a game-based training, we don't have so much variability, complexity as basketball. It's much
Mm,
more, I would say, the spectrum is much closer. So from my point of view, most of the exercises in paddle have to keep always the score and the competitive nature of the game. So when I propose already a task of my players, they know that we are going to compete.
mm,
Maybe the points, how we count, is very different. No, it changes from exercise to exercise, the point system, what are the rewards. But I would say the intention of the exercise are quite clear.
yeah.
You are competing all the time. You always want to win. What I just change a little bit is the way of achieving it. So
Mm,
they need to perform different solutions, change their behavior, adapt to achieve the goal. So I don't think in that it impacts so much,
yeah.
but it's more at the moment in which being a paddle coach at the end, you don't coach a team. You are part of a club and you have many pairs who work with you. I think the most important thing of intention is before stepping into the court, knowing the pair that I'm going to coach,
Sure.
knowing the if I had problems with them, if they buy my message completely, if they have some doubts, if they come here to perform high level, if they come here just to have fun. This has been the most impactful, the most influence impact that intention has had on
Mm,
me.
mm. Interesting. It's for me, it's in basketball, I think it's interesting because I always come back to principles of play. And this is really interesting because I think the more people have kind of seen some of the work I'm doing, they really think it's just a very vague approach. And some have even said it's like PE classes, you know? And I think what that shows is that people aren't looking at actually how specific these environments are that we're creating. And then again, I think it's also the principles of play because I think when you understand an ecological approach, it really changes, like you said, the lens you view your sport. And when I really delved into the research and looked at all the things we've spoken about today, the principles of play that I used as a coach changed completely. And I went from like years ago, more like controlled offenses, right, which we see a lot of in basketball, to conceptual offense, but in a way that's very different to how we see it in the NBA. My vision for how to do the offense is very different. So it's a really interesting area. And I think one question I'd have for you building on from this is we've discussed a lot of things in this episode, Marty. And I think, it all comes down to seeing the game through an ecological lens, as opposed to this reductionist classical style, which is very much based on the individual, as opposed to the individual environment interaction. But what would you say is, as a community, what could we be doing to really help more practitioners in basketball understand some of these ideas and shift away from traditional approaches? Because I think it's something that I'm always intrigued in, is in terms of, if we just had a coach listening to this for the first time and we wanted to help inspire them to change and shift towards a contemporary approach, what could we be doing as a community in a better way to help them facilitate that?
Okay, well, first, respecting the ecological approach we believe, it's very difficult to give
Mm,
tips that are useful for everyone or receives. But if I would have to say something, maybe I would say to ask first if you are in charge of a learning process, ask your students, the coaches you are in charge, why they do things. And then if you are a traditional coach with maybe you have listened this episode and you have been surprised or you agree but don't understand to what Alex and I say, it's the same. Ask yourself why you do things. Nowadays, I'm myself in the world of paddle, and it's a bit disappointing sometimes because it's a new sport, but
Yeah.
looks like it has even more biases, even more myths than the sports that have been historical,
Hmm.
like basketball, soccer. And for me, it's a little bit frustrating when I see interventions that, from my point of view, doesn't make any sense
Yeah.
because they just satisfy
Yeah.
the coach and his mind. They don't satisfy the game, which is only the main incentive in sport and in paddle. And I don't see those people even want to change or even want to learn. And I make myself the same question. So I think that it's not going to them like you have to do this, but
Yeah.
just why you do things.
Yeah.
Why do you think that uh, the player needs to do this technique?
Mm.
Or is the player able to make basketball if you don't teach this? Okay, he makes the basket. Does the rules of basketball condition the techniques that you have to use? No, they don't mention anything. Do they say something about how to score, the points of a score? Yes. So maybe you should change your point of view from the body, from the movement, from the kid towards the game, to what the game wants. And if the kid achieves what the game is asking for, but you don't like it, then the problem is yours
Yeah.
because the kid, let's say, is aligned with the incentives of the game, with what the game prioritizes. Then if he or she is able to achieve it and you don't like it, the problem is yours. Probably you have a very big backpack of beliefs. But yeah, the fact of looking back, opening the backpack and seeing some beliefs, some myths, it has to be done for by oneself, no? Like I cannot, if you are not eager to change or if you don't want to question some of your beliefs, we can do, I'm not gonna do anything, no? I remember one of the, in the second course I had with Juan Cortez, I think he started with a video of the monkeys, no? That there is a room with 5 monkeys, the bananas on top, no? So every time one monkey took a banana, all of them were cold water was thrown to them.
Okay.
So at the end, they associated, no, when they take a banana, they get cold water. So every time somebody was going, the monkeys started biting, kicking the colleagues, no? So then the researchers, they started changing the monkeys one by one, and each new monkeys was going to the banana had an amazing travel. So he learned fast, the monkey, that he had to kick his friends once somebody was going to take the banana. And at the end, the 5 monkeys were replaced by new ones, and you had at the end 5 monkeys who were kicking each other when a friend was going to the banana without knowing why they're doing that. At the beginning of the episode, I have mentioned John Kelly's paper of periodization theory confronting an inconvenient truth, and I recommend it to everybody because I don't know what about others, but in my way it has very impactful because it was the first time I realized that I was very, very monkey, that I was doing many, many things just because that has always has been done. He explains there, John explains myths in periodization, in sport, but also he gives examples on strength and conditioning, no? Why some small decisions, some small facts at some point start getting bigger, and then you end up impacting
Mm.
a whole generation, a whole society, just because a choice that didn't make any sense at that time, but for some reason it survived. I have now I ask myself that in paddle, no? Paddle, it was a very, very small sport, and the growth has been exponential in, I would say, 4 years.
Yeah.
So, okay, how has the knowledge of paddle, the paddle coaching, has been built? Are the best coaches the ones who were in universities, who were learning how kids learn, how kids evolve? I don't think so. At the moment, what it was is that the professional paddle coaches and the ones who had more impact on all the other coaches were the only ones.
Mm.
The only ones that when paddle was played in Spain and Argentina were there. And we owe a lot to them. Like, okay, they started it and probably now we can play. But also we have to ask many questions to them, like, why this, why this? Because at the end there is people from the whole Europe, United States that comes here asking for solutions, for how to improve, how to give lessons in his club. And he doesn't find, let's say, the knowledge, empirical knowledge, scientific knowledge of things proved. He just finds opinions of what the only ones were doing.
Yeah.
And for me, you might think that I'm an arrogant, but I'm sorry, there are many things that are not, that there is a lot of evidence that says that at least there are more efficient ways to improve.
And that's
But yeah,
everything. Yeah.
the teachers, the mentors, were the ones who, the professional ones, the ones who were there, the first ones, not the most prepared ones or the one who understand more how a kid learn. Well, but if you're not even eager to say, okay, I've been here, but how does a kid learn? Just question many times why you do things. I think then is when you know why is I think is when you can make the best decisions.
Yeah. Marty, that's excellent. I don't want to build on anything you just said because I just think that's to end the podcast on that note. I think it's really effective question for coaches to consider who have listened to this. So I'm going to say a big thanks for coming on today. I really recommend that coaches listening to this check out your podcast, the Fosbury Flop. You've had some excellent guests on. And just a big thanks. I love all the work you're doing. It really inspires me with transforming, and it's great. We're having an impact on the whole sports movement community, the sports world. So big thanks for coming on today, Marty.
Thanks to you, Alex. It was a very big pleasure. As I told you, I met you once I was starting to get in touch with ecological approaches, and I was surprised to don't see anything in basketball. Then I met you. Then I saw the project of transforming basketball, and just thank you very much to you and for the work you are doing to spreading a little bit why things happen, how to help coaches, but not from your biases or from your opinions, but from knowledge and reasonable facts. So thank you very much.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you, Marty.